Hello, I'm Franklin Jones. I'm the author of the book, The Black Matrix. Some of you have been following me for years. I've been putting out information on the internet since 2006. What I'd like to talk about a little bit right now is the fact that we are drowning in disinformation, and our communities are now more divided than at any previous time in history. And we have to pay attention to the fact that our community is now drowning in so much disinformation, different ideologies, and we're now more divided than any previous time in history. We have to look at things realistically and ask who benefits from the collective state of our people today? The confusion, the disinformation, the division. And the answer is white oppressive forces. Whenever the culture of the oppressed changes in manner that benefits the oppressors are always behind the changes. Now, I know for some of you, we have been conditioned and socialized to never focus our attention towards our oppressors anymore. We've been conditioned to always aim our collective aggressions towards ourselves. Whenever people like myself speak up like this, I'm accused of being scapegoating, wrongly blaming the man for our own shortcomings. And lots of us have been socialized to think in that manner. But we have to, we must not turn, we must not fail, we must not fail to turn over all stones to find the truth of our condition. Why is it focusing on the white man now considered something wrong? Okay? Especially given the history shared between we Africans and the white society. So let's look. Now, so often when we look at our collective state, we say that everything that we're experiencing is connected to slavery. We would say that our division is slavery. Our sagging our pants is slavery. We tend to tie those things. The fact that we call ourselves niggers, slavery. But let's look at things realistically. The current state, these changes in our culture, are not consistent with the African American culture following slavery. Following slavery, we wore our pants up to our waists. We didn't call ourselves niggas, bitches, and hoes. We didn't glorify pimps. We didn't perceive ourselves as being our worst enemies. We collectively agreed that our worst enemies was white oppressive forces. Now, today, millions of us insist that it's we that are now our own worst enemies. My point being made is the collective state today is not consistent with what it was following slavery. It's not even consistent with what it was in 1965. Our collective state today is a result of something that was done to the African American culture. Okay? And it worked so well, they did it around the world. In 1968, when the white society was faced with unprecedented unified black protests, they recognized that they couldn't use those blatant systems anymore, those segregation systems used for subjugating black people, because it resulted in unprecedented black protests, and it became no longer socially acceptable with the changing times. So they deployed what is called an ideological subversion system against the African American population. An ideological subversion system is an insidious, overt tactic that uses disinformation to change what a targeted population believes. More specifically, it changes a targeted population to think and behave in ways that are against their own self-interests. This is what was done to the African American culture. Now, I'm going to quantify and validate what I just said to you. Some of you insist that our conditions result of slavery. There's this one disinformation program being spread that we sag our pants because it's connected to slavery. And someone tied it to the raping of men. Okay. Now I know that happened during slavery, but that has no connection to why black men now sag. The white enslaver would never allow the enslaved to walk around with his pants sagging, because he would never want the risk of his wife or his daughter seeing the larger member of the African slave. He would never want them to see that. Also, a slave who is forced to hold up his pants is less proficient as a slave. You can't pick much cotton holding up your pants. So the story that the sagging is connected to slavery is untrue, totally untrue. The narrative that the sagging came out of the prison industry is totally untrue. Yes, there are those who engage in that, but in the prison industry, you can ask correctional officers and you can ask inmates. Okay, I used to work in a U.S. federal penitentiary as a case manager. Okay, now here it is. In the prisons, they give them Velcro strip belts that they must wear to keep their pants up. If their pants sag, they get infractions. So many infractions that we take rights away from them. This is what happens in the prison system. Okay. And also, men who engage in homosexual behaviors in the prison industry don't return to their families flaunting that fact. Most don't come back flaunting the fact that they were bent over and getting screwed while in prison. Most people, they return from that, they would conceal that. They would try to keep that in their past. So to say that men are coming from the prison and they're flaunting the sagging, that's where it comes from, that is an ignorant, idiotic ideology that's designed to keep us from the truth, okay? The reason why black men sag is all connected to the ideological subversion system that was deployed against us in 1968. We are under a system that most of us don't understand. And we have to learn and understand this system in order to develop the proper counter strategies to overcome it. This is why those who know the truth must teach. We are drowning in disinformation. Now, here are the facts. The white society socialized Africans after they enslaved us. They invaded, colonized, and socialized Africans. The reason why they socialized Africans is because while the white society, utilizing their weaponry advantage of guns and cannons, were able to invade, colonize, and enslave the Africans, they could not win peace indefinitely with Africans unless they socialized the minds of the Africans. Okay? Because whenever people are enslaved, invaded, oppressed for long durations, their collective aggressions toward their oppressors will continue to grow until acts of rebellion becomes inevitable. The oppressed always rebels. This is an inherent response within the collective human psyche whenever people are oppressed for long terms, okay? And the only way to prevent these pending rebellion is to socialize the minds of the oppressed. Socialized is when the dominant culture exploits their monopoly over information that is fed into the minds of the subordinate population to shape their minds to think and behave in ways that benefits the white oppressors, the dominant society, their conquerors, the enslavers. The Bible was the first propaganda literature used to socialize the minds of Africans. The early white enslavers' conversion of Africans into their religion had absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with saving the souls of Africans so that Africans may join them in the afterlife. And this is an irrefutable fact because the early white enslavers believed that Africans had no souls and that heaven was for whites only. In fact, the early white enslavers, the early white Christians, believed that the thought of an African entering the kingdom of heaven was as ridiculous as a dog doing so. These are facts. When you look at facts as they were, you can say with 100% certainty that the white society's conversion of Africans into Christians had absolutely nothing to do with saving the souls of Africans. The reason why they did it was to socialize the Africans to think and behave in ways that benefits the white society. More specifically, they indoctrinated the belief of a white God into the minds of the Africans. Once the belief of a white God is accepted by the African, this creates an adoration towards whiteness. This adoration towards whiteness is then transposed onto white people. This made the Africans feel and behave in a subservient manner towards the white people. This aided and facilitated the colonization of Africans, and it made Africans into more loyal slaves. This is the reason why they converted Africans into their fate. It was to socialize our minds. Now, some of you will say, well, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Not because they did that means the Bible isn't true. But let's look at the facts with the Bible. The Bible was actually written in 325 AD under the guidance of Emperor Constantine. Emperor Constantine himself was a pagan. He never converted to Christianity. Even on his deathbed, he refused to become a Christian. He died without doing so. The Romans who wrote the Bible, these Romans engaged in massive orgies, bestiality, sodomy, incest, and death sports. They continued these practices before they wrote the Bible, during the time they wrote the Bible, and after the Bible was written. These facts, combined with the fact that the Bible strongly condones slavery, totally disqualifies the Bible from being the true words of God. It is not. Okay, the Bible was a propaganda literature that the white society used to socialize the minds of Africans. Now, in the 1960s, African Americans had started revolting. Okay, started terribly revolting. President Lyndon B. Johnson put together a committee, and the job was to study the African American community to find out what was the reason and how to develop ways to remedy the problem. Now, apparently, of course, the socializing of the Bible no longer contained the minds of the Africans. They recognized that they had to do more to keep Black collective aggressions aimed towards ourselves. Now, they hired social science, and the social scientists determined that there were aggravating factors for the unprecedented Black protests. They determined that it was caused by an elevated and unifying Black collective self-esteem brought on by the emergence of the Black Pride movement. An elevated self-esteem brought on by the Black Pride movement. They also determined that Black collective aggressions had continued to swell until Black rebellion became inevitable. So they recognized they had to abandon the blatant subjugation tactics. So what they did, they started a propaganda campaign to keep the collective self-esteems of Black people very low. This is why all of our narratives from the white society are negative. Negative. Come on, critically think. Can you not see how cartoonishly unrealistic it is that virtually all narratives that we receive about ourselves from the white society are consistently negative? That's cartoonishly unrealistic. Or have you ever noticed that all narratives that we receive from the white society that makes any comparison between whites and Blacks favors whites over Blacks? You see, through repetition, that's designed to instill the myth of white inferiority into our subconscious mind. They keep us believing negative about ourselves, and they're instilling the myth of white superiority into our minds. And you also notice that we're always hearing about Black on Black crime, Black on Black crime. In America, 86% of whites are killed by white people. Okay, most race are killed majority by their own racial group is because that's who they intermingle with, interact with. That's why that's the case. But we're only hearing about Black people because the goal is to keep us believing that it's we who are our own worst enemies. Therefore, shift our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it against ourselves. We are constantly inundated with propaganda that keeps our self-esteem low and it keeps our collective aggression shifted against ourselves. This is why nowadays, unlike the 1960s, when we agreed that white oppressive forces was our worst enemies, today millions of us insist that it's we who are our worst enemies. It's because we have been socialized to think in this manner. We've been socialized to think in ways that benefits the white society. In 1968, those social scientists were also instructed they had to study the African American culture and find our greatest weakness and exploit it, find our greatest strength and attack it unrelentingly. They determined that our greatest strength was Black unity. That was the reason for the unprecedented Black protests. So they're attacking Black unity from constantly keeping us believe that we are our worst enemies. We're our worst enemies. That's how they constantly attack our unity. This is why many Black people walk around with self-loathing. Okay, now in addition to attacking our self-loathing, they recognize also was that our greatest weakness was the fact that we were stripped of our true identity and culture. This means we are more susceptible to negative social engineering, particularly negative media social engineering. Okay, most people think that the media reflects our reality, but in truth, people most often imitates how they see themselves depicted in the media. A group's identity is shaped by how they see themselves repeatedly depicted in the media. The white society controls the media image of black people. So it's them who are telling us how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to dress. So they start negatively distorting our narratives, and we imitate it. We become those derogatory media depictions of ourselves that we accept as being our reality. It's a true social science known as media social engineering. The reason why they're easier to do to we African Americans than they're able to do to Native Africans, because Native Africans were not totally stripped of their true identity and culture like we were. So they start putting out, we calling ourselves niggers, so we start calling ourselves niggers. We start calling ourselves bad on film, we start calling ourselves bad in person. We start calling our women bitches and hoes, we start calling bitches and hoes. We start glorifying pimps, and our culture is being negatively steered through media social engineering. Okay, now what this whole thing is called, as I said, it's an ideological subversion program. Ideological subversion program is a system that uses disinformation at a targeted population to change what a target population believes. It changes the population in ways that are against their own interests. Our culture has been changed in ways that are against our own self-interest. It is a social science. We have to elevate our minds above biblical fairy tales and silly slave syndrome myth and recognize that the white oppressive forces are deploying social sciences against us. And the social science is being deployed through their monopoly over information that we receive. We're being programmed through unrelenting media subliminal programming, the propaganda that comes into our homes. We're being programmed through miseducation. They control our educational system. And in the school, it teaches we come from nothing. Think about the cruelty here. We were born within the system, so we've normalized it. Could you imagine if Jews went to schools controlled by the Nazis? And in the school, these Jews were taught that they have no history beyond the Holocaust, that their existence began during the Holocaust, because before the Holocaust, they were nothing. They had no significance. They did nothing, wrote nothing. That's what the white society is doing to black people, doing our schools. While we're in our schools, when our children are taught, we are being taught that our history began with slavery. Nothing before then. But we say nothing, we do nothing. And what is happening? This conditions our children to accept a subordinate status within the white dominant society. It makes us believe that the best thing that happened to us was slavery, because it removed us from nothingness. We have to understand that the white society exploits their monopoly over information. And because they control our narrative, they control our media images, they control our history books, they're conditioning us to perceive ourselves through a false, marginalized identity that aids them in maintaining their social dominance over us. It's who they are, it's where they've always been. It's the inherent racist and narcissistic people they've always been. But we have been brainwashed to revere them in spite of that true history. We have been socialized to think against our own interests. Blindly believing what the white society says is against our own interests. And the majority of us do that. The facts are the white society has never earned our blind trust. The white society has never earned the credibility to control our black narratives. Never. They've been telling lies about us since day one. But yet we sit there and we allow them to educate us. We allow them to educate our children. We believe the media they give us, the news reports they give us, even though they're history. We have been socialized to perceive whites as being the authority of all that's true. And all they keep doing is feeding us black racially demoralizing and dividing lies. We have to wake up and understand that the white society exploits their monopoly over information to manipulate our minds and to negatively steer our culture. In order for black people to liberate ourselves, we have to start studying the social sciences that are being used for maintaining white dominance. For example, according to white social science, in order for a dominant society, a dominant group to maintain their population, maintain their dominance over the population, the narratives that are fed into a society must endorse the dominant group's position of dominance. This means that the narratives that are fed into a society must always exalt the dominant culture. This is why we always hear only positive narratives about white people, positive narratives about white people, and we keep hearing negative narratives about ourselves. This creates false assumptions within a society that aids in maintaining white social dominance over black people. We're in a system that most of us don't understand. We have to start reading books about social science. We have to start reading books about propaganda, social engineering. We have to. When we keep clenching to our Bibles, we make fools of ourselves. When we keep clenching to the Willie Lynch, we're making damn fools of ourselves. They're laughing and mocking us whenever we post something ridiculous about the Bible, Jesus is going to save us, or we got to overcome the Willie Lynch myth. Black ignorance is the white society's greatest power. Brothers and sisters, you have to learn social science. The white society deploys social science that are put in place. When you demoralize and divide a people and make them self-loathing, this allows you to rule over those people indefinitely. And the white society intention is to rule over us indefinitely. Their intention is to maintain their social dominance well into the future. So therefore, there are propaganda campaigns in place. When black people sit before a white person and feel subservient, this has nothing to do with a silly Willie Lynch myth. This is because that black person has been socialized from the time he was in school, from the time he went from pre-K to the 12th grade, 7 hours a day, from pre-K to 12th grade, being taught an education that exalt whites and marginalize blacks. This is where his mind was shaped. And then when that person leaves his school, graduates from his school, he's watching television. And when he's watching television, he's constantly seeing news reports that denigrates blacks and exalt whites. He's watching movies and TV shows where whites are the heroes and blacks are the villains. And it socializes how we think. It creates a prison for our minds. We have to elevate to liberate. One love and peace, brothers and sisters.